Okay, I'm going to defend Ben Davidson some more and address some of the comments that people left on the first video. So first of all, there are several people calling Ben Davidson a complete fraud. And they're saying, I'm surprised someone as knowledgeable as you, Hatman, can't see through this guy. Well, there isn't just black and white in this situation. There is shades of gray. You don't just have good trainers and rubbish trainers. It's a gradient. And Ben Davidson, as far as I can tell, is closer to the good end of the spectrum than the bad end of the spectrum. I'm not saying that he's the best of the best, but he's closer to the good end. Why do I say this? Well, because I've listened to this guy talk about boxing, analyze fights, analyze fighters, and he's a very good analyst. He knows what he's talking about when it comes to analyzing fights. And as far as the fighters he's worked with, Billy Joe Saunders, Tyson Fury, Lee Wood now, of course, and Josh Taylor. Do you really think that all these people, all these fighters would be giving up 10% of their purse? A guy like Josh Taylor, undisputed champion, he's going to give up 10% of his purse to a guy who's a complete fraud, to a guy who knows nothing about boxing, to a guy who's just winging it and has no idea what he's doing. Come on, people, stop it. This is not a reasonable or realistic position to take. He clearly knows something about boxing in order for people with this level of experience, people that have been in boxing all their lives like Tyson Fury and Billy Joe and Josh Taylor, etc., to be taking him on. So all this, he's a complete fraud, this is just hyperbolic, and it's being pushed by people who don't like Ben Davidson personally. Not that they necessarily know him, but they don't like the way he comes across. They think he's too cocky, he's arrogant, he thinks he's better than he is, and maybe he does think he's better than he is. I'm not here to tell you that Ben Davidson is perfect as a trainer, okay? But what I am here to tell you is that this idea that he's a complete fraud is silly. Yeah, it's just people that don't like him, and therefore they're finding reasons to just attack everything about him and give him no credit for anything. Now, the second point is this narrative, and it is a narrative, that fighters deteriorate under Ben Davidson. Nobody ever improves under him, apparently. They only ever deteriorate. Well, let's look at it. He was with Billy Joe Saunders for what, 1 or 2 fights? And one of them was the Artur Akhvov, I think his first name is Artur, the Akhvov fight. And Billy Joe didn't look good in that fight. Well, yeah, Billy Joe didn't look good against Akhvov when he was trained by Ben Davidson. He also didn't look good on that fight he had in America. And I forget the guy's name. Was it Conceição or something? I forget his name. Look it up on his box rec. He didn't look good in that fight. He looked terrible in that fight. And you know who was in his corner that time? It wasn't Ben Davidson. It was Dominic Ingle. Does that mean that Dominic Ingle is no good at improving fight? Nobody ever improves under Dominic Ingle because he had that fight with Billy Joe where Billy Joe looked poor? You know what I mean? No, obviously he had good performances with Billy Joe too, but I'm just pointing out that you can have a bad performance under any trainer. It doesn't necessarily mean the trainer's bad. There can be other factors, other things that play in to having a bad performance. Weight can be a factor. The fighter's discipline outside of the gym can be a factor. Style can be a factor. You know, jet lag, there's all kinds of things that can play into why a fighter doesn't put in a good performance. So again, judging him on what? Just 1 or 2 fights with Billy Joe Saunders doesn't really amount to much. Then we move to Tyson Fury. Well, he had how many fights with Tyson Fury? I think 5 fights, because there was Sefer Safiri, Pianetta, Deontay Wilder, Tom Schwartz, and then Otto Wallin. Well, the first 2 fights were easy, right? He won comfortably against Sefer Safiri and Pianetta. Then he fought Deontay Wilder when he was clearly still weakened from losing an enormous amount of weight. And in the eyes of many people, he beat Deontay Wilder. That was a better performance. He looked more impressive, even though he was dropped twice and it went to a draw. That was a better performance than against Pianetta or Sefer Safiri. He looked better. So you could say that he improved, right, under Ben Davidson. Now, obviously, the people who don't like Ben Davidson are going to shoot that down. Oh, well, no, it's just because Tyson Fury wasn't up for the previous fights. Oh, so now you take other factors in. So when somebody performs badly under Ben Davidson, you don't factor in anything else. It's only down to the trainer that this guy's performed badly. But when someone performs better under Ben Davidson, oh, no, that's got nothing to do with Ben Davidson. That's just only Tyson Fury was more up for the fight. People, you can't have it both ways. Okay, so anyway, he has that fight against Deontay Wilder where he looks better than he did against Pianetta in his previous fight. He then fights Tom Schwartz, destroys him. He then fights Otto Wallin, and he has some issues. And based on that, see, this is the only fight that Ben Davidson had with Tyson Fury that people want to focus on, because it's the only one that fits this narrative that people deteriorate under Ben Davidson. You see it? It's so selective, it's unbelievable. Yeah, that's the fight where Tyson Fury didn't look good, and so they used that to bolster their narrative. Very, very, very selective. And when it comes to how he improved for the Wilder rematch under Javon Sugar Hill, well, Ben Davidson took Tyson Fury as far as he could take him with what Ben Davidson knew. That's clear, but that doesn't mean that Ben Davidson isn't a good trainer. I mean, you look at Manny Stewart, for example. He took Andy Lee as far as he could take him. He couldn't offer him anything else. He told him all he could tell him. He taught him all he could teach him. Andy Lee didn't win a world title under Manny Stewart. He then went on to start training with Adam Booth, and he said he felt rejuvenated and, fresh again after joining Booth, and he won a world title. Does that mean that Adam Booth is better than Manny Stewart? No. It's just that Adam Booth has got a different approach. Sometimes fighters get stale with certain trainers, and they need a different approach. They need a new set of eyes, somebody who can see things from different angles. You see, it doesn't necessarily mean one trainer's better than the other. And speaking of Adam Booth, who's had several world champions, David Haye, Andy Lee, and there was that Irish guy, I can't remember his name. His name always escapes me, but there was an Irish guy who was was he a bantamweight or something? And he was a world champion as well. So he's had some world champions, Adam Booth. But in recent years, he hasn't been doing very well, has he? With Michael Conlan the other night, and I'll come back onto that fight in a second. Lost that with Josh Kelly and several other Adam Booth fighters. Liam Williams also lost recently under Adam Booth. He seemed to have deteriorated since the Andrade fight. Is that all Adam Booth's fault? Or is a lot of it down to the punishment he took against Andrade, or him being tight at the weight? Manny Stewart also worked with Prince Nassim towards the end of Prince Nassim's career, and many people say, in fact most people, that Prince Nassim actually regressed under Manny Stewart, that he actually got worse, he deteriorated. Does that mean that Manny Stewart's not a good trainer? Does that mean that Manny Stewart was a complete fraud? Or does it mean that the style Manny Stewart taught wasn't the right style for Prince Nassim? Or perhaps it was just Prince Nassim losing his love for boxing. Perhaps it didn't have that much to do with Manny Stewart, and at the end of the day, Prince Nassim had Manny Stewart in his corner and a guy called Oscar Suarez. Okay, so who are you going to blame it on? Is it all Manny Stewart? Is it all Oscar Suarez? Same situation as Ben Davidson's got with Devin Haney. He's not the main trainer. Bill Haney is. You see how selective people are. Lots of trainers have fighters that seem to deteriorate under them, but people factor in other things. But when it comes to Ben Davidson, oh no, it can only be Ben Davidson. He's the only reason that this fighter had a poor performance. And so when Tyson Fury moved from Javon Sugar Hill to Ben Davidson, from Ben Davidson to Javon Sugar Hill, the other way around, right? He was moving to a guy who was going to teach him a completely different style to the one he'd been using in previous fights, where he was going to be more aggressive, where he was going to put weight on. Now, how many trainers in the lead up to the Deontay Wilder rematch, how many trainers out there, go check the videos and the interviews, how many trainers and boxers thought that it was a good idea for Tyson Fury to pile 20 pounds on and actually be aggressive against Wilder in the rematch? I think there might have been like Freddie Roach, might have been the only one I saw in terms of the trainers. Everyone else thought it was counterintuitive. Everyone else thought that no, he needs to just box the same way as he did in the first fight, but just better, just be a bit defensively more alert. That's what I thought as well. Okay, and that's what the vast majority of the boxing world thought. There was probably 1% of the boxing world, including all the top trainers, there was only 1% that thought it was a good idea for Tyson Fury to pile on 20 odd pounds and actually be aggressive against Wilder. So it's not just Davison that wouldn't have been able to improve Tyson Fury or add this aggressive element to his game. Most other trainers, it seems, wouldn't have been able to add that either. I think Freddie Roach is the only trainer that I can think of that actually suggested that Tyson Fury should be more aggressive in a rematch with Deontay Wilder. I didn't see any other trainers saying that. But Ben Davidson's the only one who gets the flack for not being able to add that aspect to Tyson Fury's game. He just got stale with Davison. And when people talk about Davison being a sycophant and him being a cheerleader, yeah, he is. He does come across as sycophantic and like a cheerleader. Certainly with Tyson Fury to this day, he comes across like that. I've been critical of Ben Davison for that in the past, but I don't allow the way Ben Davison comes across, if he comes across as arrogant or sycophantic, I don't allow that to prejudice my assessment of his ability as a trainer and his results as a trainer. But most other, or a lot of other people, They do. They allow their dislike for him to prejudice the way they assess his results and his ability. Anyway, let's talk about some of the other fighters that Ben Davidson has worked with. Talked about Billy Joe, talked about Tyson Fury. Lee Wood. There was somebody that left a comment on part 1, the first video, where they said that Lee Wood hasn't improved under Ben Davidson. I mean, what? Lee Wood lost to Jazza Dickens a couple fights back. Jazza Dickens, no disrespect, but he lost to Jazza Dickens. Then he joins Ben Davidson and he beats Zucan, right? And picks up a WBA, whatever it is, regular strap. And then he beats Michael Conlan back to back. And somehow that's not an improvement? How does that work? Improvements are in the results. Yeah, he got outboxed by Michael Conlan. Well, guess what, folks? There's no trainer on earth that could make Lee Wood a better boxer than Michael Conlan. He just doesn't have the natural talent or ability to be able to do that. Any trainer that Lee Wood has is going to have to get him to be aggressive against someone like Conlan. You're not going to get him to be able to outbox that guy. I don't care if you brought Manny Stewart and Customado and everyone else back from the dead. They would not be able to get Lee Wood to outbox Michael Conlan. All right. What Ben Davidson did with Conlan and beating Can, he got him in shape, obviously. He got him in the right mindset and he guided him through the fight. You know, when a fighter comes back to the corner and he's been dropped as heavily as Lee Wood was dropped at the end of that first round against Conlan, the trainer needs to be there and he needs to know the right things to say. You see, there's been talk in the past about trainers not really doing much in the corner. And certain fighters have said, well, the fighter knows what to do. They don't, particularly experienced fighters, they know what to do. They don't really need that much instruction until there's a crisis. When there's a crisis, that's when the trainers actually earn their money. And people criticize Rob McCracken, of course, for not really earning his money. Let's just call it that. Some people see it that way. In the AJ Usyk fight, telling AJ the things he needed to hear, rather than telling, oh, amazing jab, AJ. He should have been telling him, you need to press this guy because you're falling way behind on points. You see? Well, Ben Davidson told Lee Wood the right things. His fighter was in there against somebody who was way more talented and skilled. It didn't matter who trained Lee Wood. It was always going to be like that. But Ben Davidson still got him, a guy who with inferior talent to the opponent, to win the fight. Yeah, he was way behind on certainly my card, but he started wearing Michael Conlan down, having more success going into the championship rounds, and then finally got him out of there in the 12th. You have to give Ben Davidson credit. You can't only focus on times when his fighters have had poor performances and blame that all on Ben Davidson. And then when his fighter has a good performance and gets a good result, you say, oh, that's got nothing to do with Ben Davidson. People, come on, you can't have it both ways. And you see, this narrative that fighters only ever deteriorate under Ben Davidson only holds up if you're selective. If you are actually objective rather than selective, the narrative doesn't work. So Lee Wood is improved under Ben Davidson. Tyson Fury improved from the Pianetta fight to the first Deontay Wilder fight under Ben Davidson. And I'm sure if you look at Ben Davidson's... And let's talk about Josh Taylor again. Again, just to remind you, with Josh Taylor, he had a poor performance against Baranchyk under Shane McGuigan. A lot of people didn't think he won the Regis Prograis fight. And, you know, he joins Ben Davison. He has a win, well, one win and then a win where he looked poor against Jack Catterall, which most people, including myself, feel like he actually lost. Is that all down to Ben Davison? It can't be down to weight. It can't be down to anything outside of the ring. It can't be down to Josh Taylor's mindset. It's all down to Ben Davison, is it? So anytime a fighter has a bad performance, we can blame it all on their trainer then if we want to be consistent. So I'm not on board with this narrative that people are trying to push that everybody deteriorates under Davison, because as far as I can see, not true. Is Davison the perfect trainer? No. Is he going to be the best trainer for every fighter? No. Is he going to be able to get every fighter to reach their ceiling, to maximize their potential? No. But no trainer is. There is no one-size-fits-all trainer who's going to be an absolute dead cert to be successful with everybody. No such trainer exists. Right? Talk about Virgil Hunter, for example. Virgil Hunter has had one standout talent in Andre Ward, who he took from amateurs all the way through to professional world titles and all-time great status. But who else has he produced? Do you know what I mean? Who else has he managed to produce? In order to get a fighter like Andre Ward, you need a perfect storm. It's not just the case of the trainer being so amazing. No, you need to have the talent. You need to have the fighter needs to be in the right mindset. The trainer and the fighter need to gel in terms of personalities. The trainer needs to understand the fighter's ability and his style that he teaches needs to be the correct style for the fight. So many different things play a part. And of course, the fighter has to stay disciplined in the long run to have the kind of career that Andre Ward has. And Ward, of course, has certain things. He has a certain boxing brain that you can't teach. There's certain things you can teach Andre Ward. Yeah, I'm sure Virgil Hunter taught Andre Ward a lot, but there would have been a lot of things that Andre Ward knew intuitively, things that he could sense himself in the ring that Hunter didn't need to teach him, that it's very difficult or nigh on impossible to teach a lot of fighters. Now, I'm not saying Virgil Hunter's a bad trainer at all, but he certainly hasn't been as consistent as, let's say, a Manny Stewart, who took many fighters from the amateurs or from their pro debut all the way to world championships. Not many trainers in the long run have that kind of track record. Dominic Ingle has produced several world champions, but again, look at Dominic Ingle's age. What is he, in his 50s? Ben Davison's, I think, 29. And people are acting like, oh, well, he needs to have produced all these world champions and taken people from scratch and built them up to the top. The guy's just 29. You know what I mean? Give him time, man. So yeah, that's my take on the comments to the first video saying Ben Davison is just a complete fraud. Well, yeah, so all these fighters who have given Ben Davison a job training them and they're paying him 10% of their purses, they're all just dumb. They don't know anything about how to hire a trainer, or they just want a backslapper. That's it. Well, there's a million backslappers. Josh Taylor could find a backslapper from anywhere. Josh Taylor trialed with several different trainers before he settled with Ben Davison. And so what? He only joined Ben Davison because he's a backslapper. People, this is silly. There's obviously more to it than that. And if you've heard Ben Davison talk about boxing, you know that this guy actually knows something. He's not just a backslapper. So yeah, all the stuff that he comes out with and acts annoying. And I forgot to mention and talk about Devin Haney. Another example. Devin Haney had unconvincing performances before Ben Davison was associated with him. I had to like, Devin Haney is only just now, since he started working with Ben Davison recently, started having unconvincing performances. No, he had unconvincing performances before that. Devin Haney is a big guy at the weight. So what, that's not and also, Ben Davison's not even his main trainer. His dad's the main trainer. But yet somehow, oh no. His dad gets all the credit for the good performances previously, yeah? And no one criticizes the dad for the bad performances they had under, Devin Haney had under him. But when Ben Davison comes in, oh, he had a bad performance. It's all because of Ben Davison, even though he's just the assistant trainer. No. It's got nothing to do with Bill Haney. It's got nothing to do with weight. It's got nothing to do with style. It's got nothing to do with Devin Haney potentially, reaching his limit as a fighter, reaching his ceiling. No, it's got nothing to do with any of that. It's all just Ben Davis. You see, people are trying to shoehorn this narrative in. They want to be very selective about what they're looking at so the evidence will fit the narrative. That's what people are doing here. When realistically, it's an unfair and biased assessment of Ben Davison's work. That's what it is. So, yeah, I get that he can be annoying and arrogant and all this kind of stuff, with the hair mousse and hair gel, he's doing his hair, look like Chesney Hawks and stuff like that. I get all that, but put all that stuff aside if you can. All this dislike you have for the man, that's okay, but just put it aside and look at things objectively. And if you do, you'll realize that this man is not a complete fraud and all this kind of stuff. This is just silly hyperbole. Again, just 29 years of age. Look at who he's worked with. Look at what he's done for a guy that young, who didn't have a famous father like Shane McGuigan has, who had to come up in boxing from the bottom up, get himself known, do networking and work with different fighters and improve his skills and study and all this kind of thing. What, we can't give him any credit? Again, I'm not saying he's the greatest trainer in the world, but to say that he's a complete come on, people, this is silly. It's just silly. Anyway, I'm out.